geared around supporting the mother.
Right.
And that fathers have a harder time accessing or navigating resources, or that there's less resources available for fathers. And so, you know, whether that's true or not, that I think that's, you know, probably, you know, requires some additional research.
Right.
But definitely there is perceptions around what that means in terms of the imagery that surrounds these kinds of notions, you know, in terms of the role of the father versus the role of the mother. And so for me, it was important to sort of say, you know, the father is more than just a provider of a check. And you know, there's certain sort of checklists that say if you fulfill these things, you're a good father, and from a census or social service perspective, you've fulfilled all your duties. And for me, again, these notions weren't the complete picture, and none of the images that I took are about completing that checklist. It's about all these sort of ephemeral qualities that often get lost and that are not part of a consideration of a program coordinator.
And it does seem, though, as you're looking at some of the images, there is some missing biography in them, but there is some of these images that also have some elements of biography. You know, I'm thinking about the grouping with Jerome and his father, and all of the ephemera of their life. You know, the Africa Unite poster in the background.
Absolutely.
Those kinds of very grounded kinds of images, versus something that comes that's in a sort of nondescript space.
Absolutely.
You know, the space of the city, as opposed to the space of the interior.
Absolutely.
You know, so there seems to be a lot of play in that work, in the work around those. Sort of binary opposites, is that right?
Absolutely, and that was done on purpose because I really wanted to show that a strong sense of family and fatherhood definitely can be supported by tradition, by cultural references, by all these things that you just mentioned. But the absence of those things doesn't necessarily mean that you know, families that don't have these things automatically are dysfunctional, or that a strong sense of fatherhood cannot emerge in a context that is devoid of these things. And so I really wanted to give the fathers themselves a sense of agency, that if they so decide to be present fathers and define fatherhood in terms of what is available to them and how they can make that best work for their family, that this very much is a key ingredient to how fatherhood and strong families can emerge, because you see it in their children's eyes, you see it in terms of how they interact. And you know, so you know, one level of the conversation that often occurs in among pundits is, you know, in addition to the Moynihan report, which often hints at broken families, that you know, the black community as a whole is in disarray, and if you know, there's notions around respectability. If black men would get their act together and pull their pants up and do all these different things, then magically the system will rearrange itself, and you know, we will have strong families again. And you know, while I'm not saying that doing these things is bad, for me it's important to highlight that being respectable is definitely one thing, and it may or may not occur in tandem with being a good father, but it's not necessarily a prerequisite. And the only thing that's important for me is to show that if a man has the agency to be a good father, he can make it work within his own context. And for me, it was important not to superimpose my judgment on that father and say, you're not doing these things, or you're not showing me these things, and therefore, how can you be a good father? And you know, their story was slightly different from what I had preconceived, and it was sort of, no, we think we're good fathers, and here's how we're going to show you that. And I wanted to just sort of find a way to channel that and not sort of introduce more noise into that.
There also seems to be a conversation about what is masculine in these images too. You know, how do you define beyond the child? How is a man a man? You know, what is a black man look like? That seems to also be, or what does a black man do? Is the other kind of question, I think, that comes out of that. And so talk about that for me a little bit.
That's a really interesting question, and I'm actually glad you asked that, because this is also about Black masculinity and how that's being challenged in the media. Because what we see now from Ferguson to Baltimore is not just about racial profiling and the criminalization of Black masculinity, but also denying certain other possibilities around the wholesomeness of what a Black man can be in America. We see the usual tropes around, Black men being aggressive, hyper-masculine, violent, and therefore either deserving to be profiled or killed,
right,
or being robbed of the potential to express their full humanity. And so for me, it was important to say, no, there's ways to be a Black man in America that don't correspond to these notions. And for me, that was initially difficult to photograph, because I had to sort of work in a sort of white space, for lack of a better word. But I knew I was onto something when I would get reactions to certain images along those lines of, that's not how Black men are. And it was typically when I showed pictures of Black men being loving, sensual, affectionate, and very demonstrative with their affection, that this was something that confused a lot of people. And for me, I knew I was onto something when I witnessed exactly that. Because there's sort of different forces at play specific to the Black fatherhood work. It's the notion that there's still a separation between paternal and maternal duties at home.
right,
So, the mother does certain things at home. She cooks, she cleans, she's very tender with the children. The father's the provider, the breadwinner, the writer of the check. And for me, I wanted to actually turn this a bit around and show actually fathers in roles that are traditionally reserved for the mother, and sort of dissolve that separation of paternal versus maternal duties, and sort of, that caused some confusion among some viewership. And then also the notion that when I talk to some of the folks around the images, there's this notion that being a Black father somehow seems to emasculate the Black male.
Right.
Because I'm a father now, there's certain things I cannot do anymore as a Black male.
right,
And for me, it was important to say, no, actually being a father empowers you to own your masculinity in ways that you probably couldn't before. And that was important to show in these images as well, that the beginning or the pursuance of fatherhood doesn't negate you being a male or the full expression of your manhood. It actually adds to it and enhances it, and that was important. That the fathers find a way to express their masculinity through fatherhood and not in spite of it.
So in some ways, it feels a little bit like you're pulling back the veil in some ways, pulling that curtain back.
Absolutely.
And so when you were taking certain photographs, for instance, when you are in fact doing that, when you're capturing that tender moment, how much interaction do you have once the image is made with the subjects? Are fathers then looking at these pictures, saying, and what are they saying about those images?
Yeah, I make it a habit to share the images right away, because most cameras are digital, and they can see those images right away, and they have an interest as well. They want to see, like, what have you done? And I make sure they immediately have that feedback. And I also make it a habit to send my images to all my families right away, whether I choose them, for later work or not. I want them to have access to it. And so they give me real-time feedback in terms of what they like, what they don't like. And for me, it's important to get their feedback, but also I know that a lot of the images I take are not something that they would like to be seen in.
Right.
Because documentary style photography isn't really most people's thing, and I would probably hate myself being shot in such a fashion. So for me, it was important to say, look, here's how I see you. How does that resonate?
Right. That's interesting.
And so when they say, you know what, it's weird, it's unfamiliar, but I see myself in ways that I didn't think I could actually see myself. And I didn't know I do that. I didn't know I look like that when I change a diaper or I touch my child. I didn't know I look like my son in certain ways. So it becomes almost an aha moment for some of these families where they're like, oh, this is what I do when nobody's watching.
Right. So you sort of reveal the truth for them as well. Because you'd imagine, too, that there are their own preconceived notions of their masculinity, somewhat inscribed by their environment as well. You know?
Initial couple of weeks and months, again, they either ask me, so what do we do? How do you want us to act? And I say, I don't want you to act. I just want you to be. And they're puzzled because what do we do now? And I said, just do what you do every day. Or sometimes I have to leave a room, leave somebody do their thing for a couple of minutes and then enter the room quietly and see what they're doing. And when they stop asking those questions of what do we do now, and when they just, because they have things to do and they can't just wait for me and me giving them directions, so they're just like, look, we got things to do. We got to cook, we got to clean, we got to, monitor homework. I'm like, fine, do that. So when they stop asking me questions and when they stop interacting with me and just live their life and they know I'm taking pictures but they're not really bothered by it, that's when I know they're showing a real sense of self and not really something that's projected or acted or expected. But that takes a while, and then that's also fluid because some days are better than others. Some days they're more self-conscious than others, and when they have bad days, I have to respect that and remove myself from that situation and say, look, today maybe is not a good day. I see you're busy or occupied or not in it. I'll come back another day, and just kind of give them enough space to kind of rearrange that relationship a bit. So
going back to locations, because some pictures are taken in New York, some pictures are taken in the South.
Yep.
You're right. So what about location? Why switch location?
That was mainly an access thing. New York, because it's close to Toronto. It's an hour away by plane, and I can easily go in and out. Also, because of the size of the city, it's easy to find suitable subjects. The South, because sometimes I find a father online who's really either willing to work with me or who I want to work with, and they just happen to be in some location that is maybe not so easy to access. So one of the fathers I had known from before, he's also a photographer, and he said, hey, I thought about this and I kind of want to work with you. And he happened to be in rural North Carolina. So I was like, I guess I have to come out to where you are. So it was a function of access and having a relationship. But I didn't want location to sort of be a factor in that sense, even though there was definitely some differences from geography to geography. But nonetheless, the location plays a part in that it either opens or closes certain possibilities. Folks in the city only have so much limited space to express certain things with the children. They can't just go somewhere and play. And there's a picture in the book of a father in the Bronx who plays baseball with his kid in the parking lot. And some people get it. They're like, oh, there's probably no diamond in the area, right? And others are like, why is he in the parking lot when you can just go to a diamond? And I'm like, well, no, that's not an option. So it's in that sense, location does play a role, and when it lends itself to an interpretation of what a father does to make things work, I use it. So
having gone through this process, what have you learned about your journey?
That's an interesting question. Because I did set out initially to sort of heal my own approach to my own past, because I learned about my own absent Black father as a surprise, and I had already been an adult, and I had grown up with a father who I thought was my biological father, and then turned out not to be. And so for me, it was sort of, what do I do with this information? I don't know anything about this man, and probably never will. But instead of being able to ask him a million questions, what do I do with this now? And so this project was about, finding a way to forgive him and myself for holding on to a lot of resentment. And so at the end of the day, this was about forgiving myself even for holding on to a lot of negative feelings about a father I've never known, and questioning his choices and making me feel like somehow that my childhood was not optimal because he wasn't there. So for me, it was like witnessing all these fathers parenting in their way, not being perfect, but doing their thing every day and just being there. Presence is not about perfection. It's about just making it work every day. It just kind of forced me to sit down and think about what, these men make their choices every day. And, I cannot fault a man for his choices without knowing what his story is. And so for me, it was about getting to that place of redemption. So if I find him one day, sure, I'd love to very much have a relationship and ask him all these questions that I don't have answers to at the moment. But for me, it was kind of getting to a place of peace and quiet and figuring out, he did what he did. And it's okay. I've forgiven him.
Yeah.
So.
Is this project over?
It's over in the sense that there is a book, but the work is continuing. I continue to photograph some of the families. Not so much now from a fatherhood perspective, but the kids are growing up and developing their own voice and creating their own space within their family. Some of the mothers are saying, look, it's now our turn. We want to be in the picture. Because a lot of mothers are saying, there's sort of two aspects. A lot of mothers knew what I was going to do, and they said, look, we want to take a step back and say, it's all about the fathers, and we do not want to be in the picture. And now my focus is, look, it's about the whole family. So now you very much need to be in the picture. Is it okay if I now photograph you as well? Or if I have lots of photographs of you, can I now start showing those?
Right.
And as a male photographer, there's always a bit of a tenuous relationship because I think, at least in my case, it's been my experience that females and mothers are more self-conscious around a male photographer. It's like, oh, he's coming to the house, and my hair is not done. I haven't done it. Like I can't present myself like that. And you're gonna photograph me? No. And now it's at a point with many relationships where they're comfortable enough to say, you know what, it's, I see what you did to my partners, and I think I'm ready to do that with you. I trust you enough that you're gonna show me in a way that I'm gonna be okay with it, and it's gonna be okay if people see me without my makeup, without my game face on, and all the other things. But that takes an extra layer of trust, at least for me, to build, because maybe they still have to sort of overcome the fact that I'm a male and I have a certain male gaze one way or another when I photograph them, and that's something I have to overcome.
Right.
But that said, the work is continuing, and there's definitely more focus on the family dynamic as a whole. So. And
your other works, because this is a project, but it's not the only project.
No,
so how do the other projects relate to this? Are they outgrowths? Are they completely different? Are you moving in another direction?
Because that's a good question, because I think all the work that I touch upon will sort of have at its center issues around